Broadcasting from the Red Bed Plains, you are now listening to Through the Prairie Smoke.
I'm excited to be here to actually see all the things you guys are smoking.
What's going on?
Yes.
So,
I hear you talk about Tyler's pipes, and he's got different pipes. Tyler, I don't think I ever told you this, but when I was a child, my dad smoked a pipe.
Oh, yeah?
And I have very fond memories of his pipe, and of course, you know, he quit smoking eventually because we're supposed to.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Mhm.
But I kind of miss it.
This is one of those things that Dustin and I talk about. It's like when people ask, do you smoke? It's like, this is not what they're asking.
Right. Yeah. No, when my dad smoked a pipe, it was all day, every day. And back then, you could smoke at work when I was a kid.
Oh, okay.
So he had he was a professor. So he smoked like in his office at work all day.
My choice today is Cross-Eyed Cricket. This has a base of unsweetened black Cavendish with Turkish, Latakia, and Perique, all enclosed in a light rum punch flavor. English or aromatic? Take your pick. So that's what I'm going to get to packing my pipe. Dustin, what'd you bring to enjoy?
I brought a Blackbird.
Yeah, you did.
Grackle. And I should have came prepared.
So I have I've been saving this cigar fact for this podcast, and I was excited to tell you about it, Dustin. So I love book facts as a librarian, and I read this fascinating book the other day that was all about these traditions that are almost extinct, like cultural traditions that like only 100 people or less are still practicing. And one of the ones they talked about was the lectores in cigar factories in Cuba. And these are people that read aloud to the cigar rollers.
Oh, yes.
All day. Have you heard about this?
Yeah.
It's so cool.
Yeah. Have you seen pictures where they're sitting like on top of the table and they have the newspaper and stuff up there, and then all the rollers are around there, and it's just sitting there.
They read newspapers in the morning, and in the afternoon they read books. There's this woman who has an ongoing thing for years. She's been writing her books to read to the cigar factory workers, and then they talk to her about what she's read, and she goes home. She writes a chapter every night to read to them the next day. She's written like 6 books, and they've never been published.
How interesting.
But they're all,
That's cool.
It's very cool.
Yeah, I've seen, I've run across that before, and I've seen like the pictures, and it's neat seeing them, because they're literally like sitting on top of a table above everybody.
Yeah, they're in like a little chair on top of like a platform.
Huh.
Yeah.
Just reading. That is cool.
Yeah.
So on this Blackbird Grackle, I'll read the description on this one. It says, try the new Blackbird Grackle, a limited edition, handcrafted cigar available exclusively at Tip Top Smoke. This one, of a kind cigar boosts a Mexican San Andreas wrapper, Ecuadorian binder, and a blend of Dominican and Nicaraguan fillers with rich flavors of spice, wood, and subtle sweetness. The short run blend delivers a bold yet creamy, robust smoke. It does. It's great. Elevate your smoking lifestyle with the exclusive short run Grackle from the Blackbird Cigar Company and Tip Top Smoke.
Cool.
This is a limited short run, and when all the boxes are sold, we will not be able to get any more.
Oh no. How many did you buy?
Enough?
Yeah.
We're both worried.
I bought 2 of these boxes.
Great.
Excellent.
Well, so I bought a box. Came with a free hat.
Nice.
Yeah. And I liked them so much. I was like, I'm never going to get these again. So I ordered another box. But when I ordered the second time, it was on freaking sale.
Yeah, it was.
Son.
So did you order 3 boxes?
No. I just anyways, I decided I'm gonna smoke that tonight.
Awesome.
But I've talked about Blackbird.
Yeah, you have.
And I don't know if you've heard me talk about Blackbird, if you've gotten that far.
I've heard every episode.
Yeah.
So.
But Blackbird is really cool because they're considered a boutique cigar, which is like just a new and upcoming cigar company. But their whole branding is around blackbirds. And so they name all their cigars after different blackbirds. And when I came across the Grackle, I was like, that's funny because like in Texas and here, it's like grackles galore.
They're like pests
And
almost.
yeah, they're like little raptors. They're
Parking
the
lot
little
trash
birds that
birds.
look
Yeah.
like raptors running around. Yeah. So anyways, I thought it was really cool. But man, when I smoked, I was like, some good stuff. Have to have another box. So,
Yay.
but what I'm hoping, because I got this, I brought my other blackbirds. One of them, so Cigars Daily, I talk about them all the time. And they teamed up the same way that this Tip Top Smoke teamed up with Blackbird. Cigars Daily teamed up with them and made the Cactus Wren. And the reason they went with the Cactus Wren was because they're out in Phoenix. They're in the desert.
Nice.
And that was like one of their main birds. So they went off of that and came up with this. And when this came out, this is like one of my favorites. Well, it was a short run. And short runs are basically like, we're going to do this for like a limited run and then it's done. We're done. Well, people liked them so much that Blackbird started distributing them all the time now. So I'm hoping that the Grackle falls into that category as well. We'll see. We'll see what happens.
And at this point, I'm sure our listeners have noticed there's a third voice here. How about we talk about you?
I'm sorry I interrupted earlier.
No, I'm glad you did.
What do you want to talk about me?
Well, Sarah, we're glad you're here. What are you into, and what brings you to our podcast?
Well, I'm so glad to be here. So thank you for inviting me to come on. I'm a fan. I think
I'm glad
you
to
might
hear
have
it.
heard me say I've listened to every episode.
Awesome.
I am here to talk about fairies.
Awesome.
I am a librarian and I teach children's literature to college students. And fairies have been a thing I've been kind of obsessed with since I was a child. My favorite Dewey Decimal number. I'm a librarian, did I mention? My favorite Dewey Decimal number is 398.2, which is fairies and folklore.
Okay.
So
Nice.
that kind of gives you an idea of where I'm coming
398.2.
from. Yep.
Okay.
So that's me.
Which one's cigars?
I don't have them all memorized, just my favorite.
And
We have to find out.
and
I
since-
can look it up for you right now. That's what librarians do. If you want information, I will get it for you immediately.
Yeah, so typically Sarah comes back after listening to an episode and is like, I have so much more you can look into if you're interested in that topic.
Oh, yeah. It's hard to control.
Yeah, well, no, and that's great. But that's one of those things. And we want to talk about fairies because the fairy lore is extremely influential on all the other supernatural stuff. And so that's the episode we got in store for you tonight, talking about fairies with our librarian friend, Sarah.
Do you want me to talk about my hot leaves?
Oh my gosh, yes. Sarah, you have brought something.
I did. I felt like
Afternoon.
I should
Yeah.
bring something.
And
so
it's
that I
hot
could-
leaves.
It's hot leaves. That's what
Yeah.
you guys are having, right?
Oh, that's
Hot
right.
leaves.
Yep.
right.
Uh-huh.
So I don't smoke, but I like tea. So I brought some Snowy Owl tea, which is a small tea company out of Buffalo, New York. And the tea I brought from them today is called 11th Hour. And I also have tasting notes.
Excellent.
So this is 11th Hour, warming energy for your best adventures. Featuring antioxidant-rich black tea, the intense aroma of cardamom balanced with the sweetness of vanilla, finished off with the toasty comfort of chicory. So, and it says, serving ideas. I liked this for us today. This tea blend was originally a gift between sisters, made to be a perfect tea latte to both comfort and energize. We love it with frothed oat milk and long conversation.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, that's
That's
fitting.
great.
Yeah.
Did you bring the oat milk?
I didn't bring oat milk. I think we could still have long
No, I know.
conversation
I think
even
we
without
can,
the
yeah.
oat milk.
Yeah. You know what's interesting about that is where that's from. From New York?
Because it's from Buffalo.
New York.
You know who else is from New York?
Mm-hmm. The Fox sisters.
Yeah.
That's true.
So how are you related to them?
You know, we talked about this a couple weeks ago. I don't believe that I am. I suppose it's possible.
Dustin has pointed out that for the purpose of this podcast, you are related to the Fox sisters.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, we kind of marketed it around it.
Oh, did you? Oh, no.
Yes.
I mean,
the
yay.
marketing that we pay for. Yes.
Yeah, gotcha.
No,
okay.
it's neat.
It is. It's neat.
I bet you are.
Well, we talked about having somebody look into that for
yeah,
us.
yeah.
But
I think we got sidetracked.
we did get sidetracked.
Yeah.
It's okay.
We'll check back. We'll do a follow-up. Where are they now?
Things we
Here in a
got
couple of
wrong
weeks.
last episode.
That's right.
Sarah actually is related.
To the
the
Fox sisters.
Can't wait for that one.
So, speaking of new segments and things we got wrong, I would like to talk about some things we got wrong. And by we, I mean me. Last episode, I kept referring to John Keel's book, talking about his paranoia and all of that stuff as The Big Blackout. John Keel's collection of all of those writings is actually called The Big Breakthrough. So, if you're looking for that book, look for The Big Breakthrough. So...
It wasn't too bad. I don't
it's
know
not
why you're
too
beating
bad.
yourself up.
I'm not beating myself up. I just like being accurate. You know.
I like segments.
No, okay, all right.
So-
Yeah, all right. So we have some hot leaves here. We got some smoke.
Yeah.
It's I think we ought to go through the smoke here, through
Sweet.
the prairie smoke.
And steam.
So tell us about your interest, not just in this subject, but in high strangeness and the supernatural. What is, if you are comfortable sharing a little bit of your history with us, with the weird?
Well, I don't know that I have a lot of history. We have talked about experiences that I've had, but I am not a strong believer, so I tend to blow them off a little bit.
I'm
No
curious.
judgment. No judgment.
Yeah, no
Yeah.
judgment.
No judgment.
I'm curious about you, as you say, you are not a strong believer. What do you think that Dustin's and I's belief level is on this stuff that we talk
Oh.
about?
I see you guys as sort of agnostic on this kind of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Could be.
it's
We
a
don't know.
It's a recognition of like I don't understand,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of where I come
Sure.
from too. It's like I don't understand. I want to understand, but I come to it with a little bit of a skeptical
Mm-hmm.
eye. And what interests me is really like why people have these kinds of beliefs. Like, what is the role of a belief in fairies, for example, in a culture, in a society? How does that explain things that are happening? How does that create like a moral system? And I think all of that is really valid, right?
Yeah. Dustin and I talk a lot about people are made up of their experiences. All they know is what they know. You know, you can't know something you don't.
That's correct.
So, Dustin was talking about whatever you can grab onto that grounds you into that situation. So when you experience something weird, what are the stories that you've heard? What could this thing possibly be? And I think that's why our topic of conversations, fairies, is so interesting, because they have been a lot of things over centuries.
Yeah.
So, were you interested in sharing any of your haunted house stories?
Yes, I will tell you my haunted house stories. So, so when I graduated high school, I moved into a house with 4 other youths, and it was my first time living outside of my parents' house. And the house we were living in was my friend's grandmother's house. And before I tell this story, I just want to say I'm telling a story of what I remember,
Sure.
which is not necessarily what actually happened.
Of course,
right?
yes. That's how
and
our
I
memories
think that's
work.
really important, I think, when you're talking about all this kind of stuff.
Yes.
You know. So my memory is that we lived in this house, and my friend's grandmother had died, and that's why her parents had an empty house. So we all knew moving in that there had been a death,
Yeah.
right, related to this house. And so when we lived there, we would often hear doors opening and shutting at night, but sometimes in the sometimes in the daytime too. And it wasn't like angry doors. This is something we would talk about all the time. It wasn't like poltergeist. Somebody slamming the doors, trying to scare us out. It was just sort of like casual door shutting and opening.
Yeah.
The other thing that would happen all the time was our answering machine. Do I need to explain to the youths what an answering machine is?
Most of our listeners, I think, are in their 30s and 40s. So you're talking about the tape, the little micro tape that you put in a machine that answers the phone for you.
Yes, and so the messages we would get would occasionally be like randomly just really garbled. So like it'd be perfectly fine, and then we'd have a message that was totally garbled, and then the one after it would be perfectly fine.
Huh.
And we, of course, because we already had this in our mind, we attributed that to something supernatural. So the story that we were given was that the grandmother had actually been born in the house as well as died in the house. And so there was, nobody wanted to sleep in that bedroom.
Yes.
So, of course, my friend whose parents owned the house, that's where she slept. Okay. But we would go in that bedroom and talk about, what did we hear? And occasionally we'd try to talk to the grandma.
Sure. Yeah.
So
was everyone on the same page? Like, it's grandma? If it's somebody in here shutting doors, it's grandma?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was the most, rational explanation we could come up with at the time.
And, you talk now, you were looking at this skeptically.
Sure.
At the time, how were you looking at this?
Oh, I was into it, and I thought it was really cool. I loved the idea that there were spirits who were not antagonistic.
Yeah.
That really appealed to me at that age. But I was kind of a gothy kid, too, so I was into it.
I think spirits get a bad rap all the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because, like you saying that, I think everybody's the ghost is going to be demonic, or they're going to be evil, or it's going to be a poltergeist or something like that. When you first think of, my house is haunted, that's the first thing people think is just...
Well, modern religious movements have come out and said, if it's not this one thing, then it's this other thing. And so that's one of those things.
It's a demon.
Right, yeah. And, before demon had a negative connotation, it had a different meaning. So it's one of those things. And it's interesting to think about if this was a fresh spirit that you were experiencing, this ghost or whatever going through the house. Maybe that ghost, that spirit, hadn't had the time to get so bored that they're just doing things to get a reaction. Which is something else that Dustin and I talk about. It's like, what if you're just bored and you want to play a practical joke on somebody and just, let people's imaginations run. Trickstery.
Yep.
Fairy-like.
The vibe that we had was that she was looking out for us.
That's awesome.
You know what I mean?
Good.
And so, yeah.
Do you?
And yes, fairy-like, of course. Because fairies are neither good nor evil.
But can be both.
Just like people.
That's right. That's right. And no pressure, but did you have a Ouija board story?
I have a Ouija board story.
Did it happen in the house?
No, it's a different house.
Oh, okay.
The Ouija board story is, I love this story so much. It's just so wild. So, again, skepticism all around.
Sure.
And I think even at that time I was skeptical. So this one I didn't buy into quite as much. I was younger. I was still in high school. I was having a sleepover party, and like you do, you get out the Ouija board.
Of course.
And you talk to people. And so we connected with a small boy who had died of an illness, again in the house. Norman, Oklahoma has a lot of really old houses near the college campus, and so it's not so weird. It's not like we were in a house that was built in the 80s. I mean,
yeah.
So
and not to interrupt your story here, but that is something that, like, in Europe you hear all these ghost stories, and all of this stuff is hundreds of years old. But, here in Oklahoma, the state's only 100 years old.
Yeah.
People lived here before then, of course.
Right.
But, the houses that you're living in,
Yeah.
This house was built in the 70s.
Yeah.
You know, so anyway.
So we talked to this kid and just, you know, listened to his story about how, I say listened, read, I guess,
Sure.
his story.
How was his spelling?
I think it was, I'm trying to remember. I think we ended words for him. Do you
Okay.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
He'd get like 3 or 4 words in and we would go, da-da-da, whatever it is, you know.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So at some point during this conversation, there was a knock on the door. And it was my boyfriend at the time. Now, I really hope my dad wasn't listening to this. So it was my boyfriend at the time. The friend's house that I was staying at, her mom was like just extremely chill and didn't care about anything. Permissive.
Okay.
And so I went out to his car with him to do some kissing,
Yeah.
like you do in high school. And while we're kissing,
Only in high school, though.
well, in cars.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So while we're kissing, we hear sirens. And I stop him and I'm like, do you hear that? And we look up and we see going across a fire engine right near my friend's house. And it turns out that while we were kissing in the car, her house caught on fire. Right after we had talked to this kid who was distressed. I mean, the kid was very distressed. So, you know, that gave us all the willies. It's
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
So you have supernatural encounter, and then a fire starts?
Yeah.
What was the cause of the fire?
Nobody knew. Nobody knew.
Can you lean forward and whisper that into the microphone?
Nobody knew. Now your ASMR people are going to show up in droves.
Right. Dustin and I do talk about maybe we should eat tacos or something while we're talking about
Yeah.
this right up next to the mic.
But yes, I don't
Man.
remember what the cause of the fire was. I went home. I mean, I couldn't go back to my friend's house, so
Yeah.
I just
Huh.
had my boyfriend drive me home.
Did it all burn down, or did
No.
they save it?
It was a small fire. I believe it was a kitchen fire.
Was the Ouija board in the kitchen?
No, it was in the living room. This is a really small house, so you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man.
So that's my Ouija board story.
That's exciting.
It was very exciting.
Interesting. Yeah.
I would say that I've been around a Ouija board that worked one time, and I think it's connected to a person, because Susan and I had tried before, and we could never get it to work.
I'm pretty sure I was driving that Ouija board. I'm just going to be honest right now.
Okay.
At the time, I would have not fully been aware of that. But in hindsight, I'm like, that sounds like me. Do you know what I mean? It
Yes.
sounds like a story I would tell. And I was the only person in that house who probably had the knowledge of, like, what was going on at that point in history.
Okay, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yes, yeah.
So either it was real or I was driving.
Okay.
I mean, you know.
So, yeah, the Ouija board that I have.
I didn't set the fire, though.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know, still weird. Sorry.
Yeah.
Didn't mean to interrupt.
But we were pretty sure the third person that we added was driving at the time. And you know, there's a lot of stuff with Ouija boards, like when they weren't answering a question, what was the movement of the planchette? Well, that's fun. Cool.
Yeah.
So, fairies.
Yeah.
I don't have any fairy experiences, but I wish I did.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at.
Dustin had kind of a fairy. Well, elves. Elves are kind of a.
Elves are a kind of fairy, sort of. Depends on who you talk to.
Oh man, like you put me on the spot, and I'm sitting here like, what is he talking about? Like,
It's a callback to another episode.
Are you talking about the Christmas?
The Christmas one?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Oh,
Yeah.
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 Sarah knows that
That
story.
was a creepy one.
I do, because I've listened
She
to
listens
every...
to the podcast.
She has. Awesome.
It's so great
I'm
to connect with
obsessed.
listeners.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
okay.
you guys always give me something to think about. Like, I love just thinking about this kind of stuff.
Me too.
So.
It is great.
I will say, in preparation for this podcast, I read The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns, and Fairies by Richard Kirk. There is some discussion about whether this was ever published originally.
You mean at the time that it was
At
written?
the time, because it was written in something like 1691, but that must have just been a manuscript that was kept in a family, and an official printing was done in like 1880 or something like that.
That's like the perfect time.
I think, absolutely it
For
is.
all of this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, 1880 is perfect.
We're at the end of spiritualism there and all that other stuff. So, anyway, but of course this wasn't written in America. This was written
Right.
somewhere over there.
So
Dustin and I
we-
went to public school, so geography and stuff, if we talk about locations, it's all foreign to us.
So for your podcast, are you really focused on only things that happened in the United States?
No, absolutely
Okay.
not. Nope.
No, no.
I mean, I do have an American fairy story, but there's not very many in the U.S.
No. And looking for local interest stuff, because we try to do local Oklahoma stuff. In the Oklahoman in 1937, and I can't tell you the date, but apparently there was a fairy sighting published in the Oklahoman newspaper.
That's cool. Yeah.
But anyway, and there are indigenous tales of little people or the LP or whatever, and a lot of the older folks don't like talking about that, so not a lot is known. But anyway.
I've looked into that because, as you know, my background is in the Smoky Mountains in East Tennessee. The LPs are a combination of Cherokee mythology and Scots-Irish immigrant mythology in the Smoky Mountains. The Irish call fairies little people as well. So that term is not something that was sort
is
of
unique.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah. Which I think is just interesting how these cultures kind of blended together.
Or there's the basis of this in every culture, maybe.
Oh, absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely.
And it's like,
Yeah.
we have something like that too.
It's something I was looking at the other day, trying to figure out like what counts as a fairy cross culturally. So like you have in Japan, you have yokai and kami, which are like kind of like gods, but kind of like ghosts, but kind of like it kind of all gets lumped in together over there. But they have a lot of the like abilities and attitudes and approaches to contact with humans that we see in Irish folktales and fairy tales. So it's like, is that a fairy? Is it not?
So Pokemon are based on the yokai. And so, like, are Pokemon's fairies? Kind of.
Yeah.
It's interesting that different belief systems and different cultures and, like you said, yeah, we have one of those or something similar to one of
Right.
those. But isn't that interesting that all of them have it,
Yeah.
which makes it more real?
Well, could be.
And a lot of the traditions around them go sort of worldwide too. Like this prohibition on saying the name exists in a lot of different places. You're supposed to, in fact, in Ireland you call them the little people or you just call them because saying fairies can
Get their attention.
you don't want them noticing you. Yeah, so and that occurs all over the place too. And that's really interesting.
Yeah.
Like it's not just supernatural beings exist everywhere, but our traditions around them.
Yeah.
Similar ways.
Yeah.
And this is another podcast topic that maybe we can talk about, but that's one of those things about the Atlantis myth where it's like, oh, here was maybe this universal culture that some catastrophe happened, and then as the people scattered, here are all the bits and pieces, and then how we retell the stories to make sense of our new environment.
Well, and then there's the whole Jungian stuff of like
Collective unconscious.
Exactly.
John Keel's super spectrum. It's a radio wave that you tune into.
Yeah.
It's cool.
It is cool. It's fascinating, right?
Yeah.
Like, I am more a non-believer than I am a believer, but I'm still obsessed.
Oh yeah. I mean,
You know?
and that's one of those things like belief is not important. It's the stories and
Yeah.
what they suggest and what
Yeah.
they say about us that I think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exciting.
So, speaking of how similar things are, reading The Secret Commonwealth.
Give her hell.
Tear it up. The very first description that he gives in The Secret Commonwealth of fairies is essentially congealed air. And they can get into any place that air can get into. And they just kind of float around. What is that more similar to? That's ghosts that he's talking about. But he was specific in saying this is the other people. These are fairies. Of course, they also took physical forms and things like that. But the very first thing when he is talking about stuff, he is talking about them as just ghostly shapes in the air. Congealed air is specifically what he says. In one of our podcasts, we talked about the Great Hunt.
Yep.
And there is fairy migrations that happen. Are you familiar with that?
Oh yeah. I
So,
mean, I
is-
would not call myself an expert.
Sure.
Yeah.
But Sarah, do you think those bi-yearly? Are they annually? Do you know how often those occur?
It depends.
Okay,
It's one
of
of those
course,
things.
yeah.
Like there's so many different stories, like on when they happen and who the fairies are that you're talking about, because you've got the Irish fairies. You've also got the Nordic fairies. They're very similar, but they do different things at different times, and so it's kind of hard to know.
Sure. But when the fairies are on the move, that's when seers have their terrifying encounters with the fairies, because the fairies are moving with all their luggage and all that stuff just floating through the air. And we made a joke earlier about the outreach we're going to do to females, Sarah, with you on our podcast now.
I'm glad to represent all females.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yes. We will take your speaking as in general for all.
Sure, I mean, as it should be.
In Robert Kirk's book, he talks about men are the only ones who are seers. It rarely happens to women.
That's crazy pants.
It is crazy because
That's not.
it it completely flipped. If he wrote that and that was a true statement in his experience in 1691, which I doubt it.
Yeah.
But it was like only men are seers. And it was like, come on. And that totally flipped now.
Yeah.
Because now men don't believe that stuff. It's
Right.
women who believe in fairies and witchcraft and all
But that comes from a time when, like, being a seer was a position of power in a community, right?
Sure. Yeah.
I still don't believe that it was usually men, but what I do believe is history is written by...
Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
So-
in fact, my note here is like, this is probably just sexism.
Right, exactly, yeah, yes. I mean, my goodness, even things like Lourdes, the miracle at Lourdes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That was a woman who saw the Virgin Mary,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, come on.
It's typically, especially for within the last 150 years, 200 years, it has typically been women and children having these experiences. In The Secret Commonwealth, he talks a lot about how these things look, and they just wear the dress and look like the people that live in the places that they live. Like, it's not like they're wearing a Hawaiian shirt up in the hills or something. They're dressed like you would expect people to be dressed.
And you're talking about the fairies.
The fairies.
Okay.
Yeah.
But also, there's a lot of talk about doppelgangers. Robert Kirk does not talk about doppelgangers. He talks about reflex man, or a co-walker, copy echoes, and living pictures is how he
Yeah,
described.
I haven't heard any of those terms before. Interesting.
And he's like, sometimes the person has passed, sometimes the person will pass soon, or sometimes it's an omen and any other death will suffice. So
Doppelganger.
Doppelganger, yeah. Of course, it's a German word.
The fairy term I'm familiar with for that is fetch.
Let's
Fetch.
talk about it.
So it's very similar to the doppelganger idea. So a fetch is described as spectral, so more like a ghost, as opposed to like something with physical form. Copy of the person who's looking at it. So if you see yourself...
You're coming face to face with yourself.
Yes.
Okay.
If you see yourself, it's a death omen. There are some people who think that fetches are... If they come in the morning, it's like a good omen. And if they come at night, it's a death omen. And I think this is really interesting. The reason they call them fetches is because the idea is they're coming to fetch you to the afterlife.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah.
What if you just run?
What if you just run?
You just see him, you're all like, no, not now, not right now.
I
just got a new job.
Gotta finish this.
I gotta
Too
finish
busy.
this. I'll talk to you in a little bit.
Too busy. But fetches appear again in Norse mythology as well as Irish. So there's a lot of like overlap there.
We have a whole episode on doppelgangers. Doppelgangers is Dustin's thing. That's what he's trying to avoid.
Creep me out.
So
I don't even have to be mine, dude. Well, I haven't seen mine. So that's
from hearing you talk about it, it's more of you encountering someone you know that's not the person you know.
It's more of a
uncanny. Yeah.
So I was going to bring this up later when we talk about Bridget Cleary, but it feels like it's now is a good time to talk about it. So have you guys heard of Capgras delusion? I don't know if I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's Capgras. So it might be Capgras. It's a real condition that's researched. It happens now, where people think that a person they know very, very well has been replaced by a doppelganger or by a fetch or by whatever. It's called...
That lady that calls in and talks to Art Bell. Yeah.
She's pretty sure
fall under that category.
Yeah, she's pretty sure her daughter has been replaced.
Yeah, so this is the thing, like this is the whole changeling thing as well, right? So the fetch is when you see yourself. But if you see a family member who you are absolutely certain, despite they look like them to you. So it's not a thing where like in your brain you're seeing a different person. You are seeing someone who looks exactly like your wife or whatever, but your brain is convinced that that's not your wife. It's not that unusual. It actually happens sometimes in people who have dementia. So there's some question about like, you hear about people with dementia misidentifying family members as another family member, right? Is that a incident of Capgras delusion or something else? And so there's these theories that that's related to some of the changeling stuff.
I see.
That when you see a changeling or you think a family member is a changeling, it's early times. We didn't know about psychiatric disorders like this.
Right, yeah.
So
it
sort of explains some of that.
The whole thing about people having a stroke or something being different afterward, we talked about that in that episode about how that could be a way to explain that before we realize, I just had something crazy go wrong in your brain.
So, the Bridget Cleary story, which I'll go into more detail about, but later writings about that incident, psychiatrists have said we think that the main person involved had Capgras delusion, and that is why that happened. Do you want me to tell you about Bridget Cleary?
Yeah, let's hear about Bridget Cleary. Yeah.
Since I'm dancing around it.
Do you know Bridget Cleary?
I do not.
Let's hear Bridget Cleary.
So, Bridget Cleary, this is in Ireland. She married a man named Michael Cleary that she had only known for a couple of months.
Not uncommon.
Not uncommon. When did they get married? 1887.
Okay.
So, 8 years later, in 1895, Bridget Cleary was murdered by her husband. And the way all of this went down was she got very sick, and she had, I think it was tuberculosis or something. And they tried to heal her, but not with doctor stuff.
Sure,
with fairy stuff.
Okay.
And one of the ways that they tried to heal her, was apparently very common, is throwing urine on her while she was sick.
Her own or Any urine?
Unclear.
Oh, okay.
I assume
Just any urine will do.
Yeah. I don't know.
Oh, sure.
But anyway, so they did all these like fairy cures. Eventually she got better. Her health got better. But her husband started saying that she wasn't his wife, that she was someone else. And apparently he'd gotten with this guy in the neighborhood who was really into fairy stuff. And this guy helped to like convince him that his wife wasn't his wife. She did a lot of things that were unusual for women at the time. She had her own business.
Oh.
She sold eggs, and then she also bought a Singer sewing machine and became a dressmaker. All of this entirely on her own. When they first got married, she wasn't particularly independent, and then as time went on, she became more and more independent.
Okay.
And so, in truth, I think the whole community was a little weirded out by Bridget for that time period.
Being independent.
Being independent. So, he thought it wasn't his wife. The whole fairy thing of changelings was huge at this time. Like, if you look for stories, like real life, I'm doing air quotes, stories of changelings, this is a time period when most of them show up. And the way you get rid of a changeling, there are a couple of ways, some of which are not murder.
Okay.
But this guy...
you starve them, don't you?
This guy chose the murder option.
Oh, okay.
You burn them. And so she was murdered. Basically, he beat her up and put her on a fireplace, and she died by burning. 8 of her neighbors were there when it happened, and the stories contradict on what actually happened with those neighbors.
Yes.
Some stories say that the neighbors tried to intervene and that the husband locked them all into a room in the house away while he did the burning. That doesn't seem particularly plausible. Like, how's he going to overpower 8 neighbors? The court case, this actually went to court, says that those neighbors were involved. And so they were charged. The 8 neighbors were charged.
Co-conspirators.
Yeah. What's fascinating is he was actually charged with manslaughter instead of murder. And the reason that they charged him with manslaughter is the defense made the argument that he really believed she was a changeling, and therefore he thought he was killing someone else.
Yeah.
It was, oops, I accidentally killed my wife because I thought she was someone else entirely.
Wow.
And so there are suggestions that, like, he maybe had Capgras delusion, and, you know, is that an appropriate court defense? I don't know.
It was his strongly held belief then, and that's it's interesting.
Yeah. And the neighbors believed it too. I mean, that whole community believed. They may not have wanted her to be murdered.
You're sure, yeah.
But that whole community was caught up in this idea that she was a changeling because after she was sick, she started behaving very differently than she had prior to her illness. So that's
Sad.
Bridget Cleary. It's just wild to me that actually went to court.
Yeah. Oh,
you
yeah.
know? It was taken that seriously.
I think that is the story that I've heard. From parts that I remember, it was like she would normally go out and do something about when she came back, she was different. And then that's what sparked everything. And then she got better. I remember. So I think it is that same story.
It sounds like
probably
it
the
is
story
the
I've
same
heard.
story.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole egg thing is interesting too, because there were rumors that she was having an affair with somebody related to her egg business. So, and of course there was. I mean, sorry, but my feminist is going to show on this one.
Sure.
You know.
Is there something about milk?
Milk and
I
fairies?
remember something about
milk.
milk.
So one of the things that you're absolutely right. So one of the things that proved to him, milk was actually the inciting incident for the burning. So this whole thing of him believing that she was a changeling went on for a while before he actually burned her. There's a thing about fairies really liking milk, and you leave milk out for the fairies. That's like a thank you for if they do nice things for you around the house or whatever.
Or if you want to coerce them to do nice things for you.
Right. And so she asked for a glass of milk, And that is like, for him, that was when he snapped.
Oh, okay.
And I don't know if maybe she'd never been a milk drinker before.
Well, then clearly.
Right. Yeah.
Fairy.
Yeah,
Changeling.
absolutely. And all the people that were there when this happened, they had all come over for like dinner or whatever. And so she asked for milk.
And everyone's like,
everything.
She is
Yep.
lactose intolerant.
Everything went to her.
Intolerant.
Jeez.
So yes, you have heard that story before.
Yeah,
You
okay,
were
okay,
right.
yeah, yeah.
You were right.
And that's the story that creeps me out.
Yeah. Most of these stories are about children. It's kind of unusual to hear changeling stories about adults. And I think that's the other reason why the capgrass delusion thing kind of came up, because with kids it's even darker as to like why the changeling stuff comes up. And it's usually because a family has too many children or has a child that is disabled in some way and considered to be not considered, I mean truly is a drain on
the resources,
very limited resources. And they had to have some reason to get rid of this child.
Yeah.
And it's very sad, and I would never want to like excuse a situation like this.
Sure.
But at the same time, if you've got 10 kids, it's got to be a difficult thing to try to figure out how to keep, do you sacrifice your other kids for the sake of this one because they're such a drain on resources or whatever. And so they started referring to kids that were born with disabilities as changelings so that they could take them out in the woods and try to give them back to the fairies, or in some cases actually kill them. And this was such a common thing that in fact later a sort of derogatory term for people with disabilities became changeling. So it turned into like just a way to
That's
describe
what it is.
people. Yeah.
And is that not just common in Ireland and elsewhere, but did that happen here in America? Do you know?
I don't know about murders in America
I'm more
related
talking
to
about
changeling myth.
child abandonment.
Well, I mean that's murder.
Okay, you're right. Yeah. Yes, you're right.
I'm grouping it all in.
Yeah.
Didn't we just sell them? We just sold ours, right?
In
They're
America?
Like, yeah, in America. Didn't they just put them on the front porch and they were like, I can't afford to feed these people.
come take
anymore.
this
Come
one."
take
In
these
America,
kids."
truthfully, in America, we actually did have places like orphanages and stuff like that, Whereas, like, in this time period in Ireland, they didn't have a place that they could just send their kid. There wasn't, like, organized social welfare, social structure like that. So...
Everybody's on their own. Friends
Right.
and neighbors.
Right. And then your friends and neighbors murder your
Yeah.
wife with you.
Yeah.
Because we got to support each other.
Yeah.
Dark stuff. But yeah, so that's in the United States, what we have more of is just like people disappearing with the fairies, like of their own volition. And that's sort of the stories that we have around here.
People abduction.
No, less about kidnapping and more about wayward women.
Oh, I see. Okay. Well, dang it. I can't really talk about the UFO parallels if you're just talking about wayward women.
Well, so this story from Ohio, it was in the newspaper and everything. Not that everything in the newspaper was true even
Of course.
then.
Yeah, you got to sell newspapers.
You got to sell newspapers. But in Ohio, there was a woman named Kitty Crow who disappeared. About a week before her disappearance, she started talking about something about wanting to go off with the fairies. And she lived with her grandfather at the time. And so she disappeared, and she was gone for a long time, and people started saying that her grandfather murdered her. And so she came back. And she said she had been with the fairies, and she was back to clear her grandfather's name. That the fairies had let her come back because they had heard that people were accusing her grandfather of murdering her. So she came back and she hung out with her family. And then these men in antiquated black clothing, 2 men in antiquated all black clothing showed up and took her away with them again. And one of the neighbors was watching as they left, and they walked down the street and then just disappeared.
How interesting.
Yeah.
So you bring up these men in black.
And what time period was that again? You said. I just
No,
didn't-
I don't think I did say. Let me look. 1886. So yeah, right around the same time.
1886.
Yeah.
Men in
And that's
black.
what I'm telling you. Like, the late 1800s was like changeling and fairy explosion. Everybody was talking about it, even in the U.S.
We've talked about the printing press and stuff like this, but it's one of those things when it's like when people are isolated and just talking amongst the neighbors, the ideas are, I mean, the folklore is just for that area, right? You know, but as soon as people are printing newspapers and you can get those mailed to you from all over the place,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
like, oh, here's this thing that's, yeah, that had to be what I experienced, you know. Just like when you get that, the skeptical argument is when you see that UFO report in the newspaper, well, then everybody comes forward and is like, yeah, I saw a UFO too.
Right.
And, of course, the investigator is like, well, I got to talk to all these people. But the skeptic is like, well, everybody's just making it up.
Right.
You know, so.
Yeah. What was I telling you, Matt? When I initially told you about my haunted house experience. I really believe that one was a group of 5 kids who just fed each other.
And, yeah,
you know
of course.
what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was good. It bonded us, right?
Yeah. You have that experience forever.
That's bad. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And that's something else about myth and folklore. I mean, I'm sure the armed forces have their own things. You know,
Sure.
it's a cohesive group. You want it to work well together, and here's the story that we all believe and go forward with.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah.
Will you hot up some more water for me?
I sure will. We're out.
Or you're
sorry, I
chugging
love
that tea.
tea.
How was that tea?
It was really great. I actually might switch to my other tea.
Great. We should talk about
yeah.
that too.
Yeah.
I'm repacking my pipe.
Different
with-
tobacco?
No, this cross-eyed cricket.
Is it good?
The last time I smoked this, I hated it. And I
funny how
really
that keeps
enjoyed it.
happening.
Why
Yeah.
did you drink it again
Yeah.
if you hated it?
Oh, you have to. Sometimes you have to do that.
Just because you don't know.
She
whether-
hasn't got to the end of the last podcast, so she
yeah.
hasn't heard you.
Oh, yeah.
He has a whole lecture
I'm
about that.
so
at the end.
sorry. Please don't repeat it. I'm going to listen to it on my way home.
Okay, no, you're good. You're good.
I'm halfway through that one.
It's really long. It should have been a 2-parter.
I'm going to go dump this in the yard. I'll be right back.
Okay.
Read your leaves.
Yeah.
Oh, there's no floating leaves in this one.
Oh, okay.
Did
Oh,
little bag.
Yeah, you're in
Did
the
you
bags,
hear about
yeah.
us going to our tea reading?
No.
Dustin, tell the story. Why did we go to a tea reading?
So it was on me and Amber's anniversary, right?
That's right.
Our 1-year anniversary. We went to this little get together that was I can't remember how we came across
Can't
it.
remember
Amber
who
did
hosted
or
it.
something like that. Yeah.
Probably some freaking
But-
Facebook thing.
Yeah. We decided to go, and people were dressed up in Victorian gear, and basically it was a tea party. And then they had little cookies and stuff like that. But they had this lady was doing tea reading, and then this other lady was doing palm reading.
Oh, cool.
And that's basically what it was. It's just you
You
hung
come
out
in
with
and
people
they had the table set up and there was a cup and saucer in front of each one and they were all different, so you go pick the cup and saucer that you want, and when it's your turn there was a table of 4 sitting with the person doing the reading, and she had her little antique vintage tin full of tea leaves that you take a big spoonful and you put it in there, and
Yep.
Was the tea good?
Tea was good.
yeah,
They had
Yeah.
different ones, and
it's
can't
actually
remember
a
the one I-
local tea place, at least it was at the time.
Cool.
she would sell. Yeah, and then but it was interesting. And then the tea reading. I've never had it. I wanted a tea reading.
I
I didn't
want
care
one
for
too.
palm, but I wanted a tea. Everybody's like, you should have got a palm, but I'm like, no, I wanted a tea reading.
Wait, why did they say that? Why was palm better?
No,
Well,
they just say it's really.
by they he means me.
Yeah.
Like, you need to go get a palm
Susan and
reading.
Tyler really liked it. Amber wished she had. 'Cause
Why
she
did,
didn't,
well, then
right?
why did
Yeah.
you prefer the palm reading?
I like all of that stuff.
Yeah.
But it's fascinating to me. But you know, I have I'm not going to call my look curated, but I have a look. You know, I look a certain way. And so people can make assumptions about me based on how I look, I suppose. But I go to a palm reader and I've done this twice, and they just tell me about myself the whole time. Like, they tell me everything about me.
He recorded his. It was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I've actually recorded both of mine,
Yeah.
and they are fascinating.
Interesting.
Yeah, the tea
sure?
reading was really cool. I wanted to do tea reading because I'm obsessed with Peaky Blinders, and that's like my favorite show. That was the first time I ever heard of somebody doing tea leaf readings. When Amber showed me that, I was like, "Oh, we are doing that." Do what?
This may be a ridiculous comment, but it seemed like the tea reading was very subjective, and it was very imaginative. It was very active imagination.
Right. Yeah.
So it wasn't necessarily so much, this is what I see in your teacup. It's like, you tell me what you see.
Yeah.
And you divide your teacup into quadrants, and it's like, here's...
Family, and then you had like...
But you had to drink all the tea
Work
before
and-
you could read the leaves.
That's why I asked if the tea was good.
Yeah. They didn't strain it. I mean, you just put the tea in. so
that
you could
one
read the
wasn't
leaves.
as good as obviously getting the tea from at the table. But it was interesting. It was just, I think the tea she was just using was just straight up black leaf. Like,
It had something fragrant in it as
Did it?
well, but it was black
Oh, okay.
tea and some
Yeah.
other things. So we talked about leaving milk out, and that was what was the name? Beverly Cleary?
Bridget. Never made that connection. Bridget Cleary.
The children's
Yes.
author?
Yes.
with the milk thing. The reason I bring up the milk thing is there's a lot of other things that they did, right?
Ways that you can recognize a changeling beyond murder. That's what I think I said. It's like,
Yes,
there are other
yes,
ways
yeah.
that aren't
Yeah,
murder,
yeah.
but he went the murder route. So, a big one is doing something in the kitchen that doesn't make sense. So frequently it's boiling eggshells, and it's like the idea is if you do something that makes no sense at all, a fairy will not be able to resist the urge to make a comment
To
about
correct
it.
you?
Yeah.
Okay.
To be like, what are you doing? Why are you doing that? Which is wild to me, because who wouldn't be like, why are you boiling eggshells?
Well,
like that.
let's go, like, the way you like to look at these things. Let's go
Yeah.
from the feminist perspective.
Sure.
And it's like, oh, here's your husband in the kitchen farting around. Normally the servants are in there doing that,
Right.
or whatever it is. Like,
Or it's just you.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, you're an independent woman with agency. You're like, what the hell are you doing over there?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's like so many of these things, like, you know, the one that everybody knows about is drowning witches. Right?
If she drowns, she was a witch or wasn't a witch? I can't remember how it works out. She dies either way.
No, if she drowns, she wasn't a witch.
Wasn't a witch. Yeah.
So, yeah, it's kind of like that. But anyway, so eggshells is a big one.
So it's funny you say the eggshell thing, because there was something that I did read the other day. It was something about, it was like a little saying that came from someone's book about fairies, and it was talking about eggshells. And it was and the little it was like a little poem.
Oh, yeah.
And then
I don't know that
but it was
one.
but
I believe you. There's a ton of
like they were saying
little
something
things
about
like that.
eggshells, and then the kid laughed or something like that and said something, and then that's when they were like, oh, that's the fairy.
Oh, that's
yeah.
for the toddler changelings.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you
Yeah.
know, the kid's not supposed to know anything about it, but when the kid comes in and sees it and like
Yeah.
cackles with laughter, it's like, out you go.
I
Out
bet
you go.
that was a Yeats poem. W.B. Yeats wrote a lot of fairy poems, and one of the most famous one is Stolen Child, which is all about a changeling child wandering off into the woods. And the refrain is so interesting because it's the kind of thing that you could say now. So it says, it's come away, O human child, to the waters and the wild, with a fairy hand in hand, for the world's more full of weeping than you can understand. And that's like the refrain throughout the poem. And it's like, yeah.
Fairy escapism.
Yeah. Well, and that's really how I got into fairies in the first place. Like,
Yeah.
I am super obsessed with stories where people go away to another land that is not like this land and have fantastic experiences. Like, my absolute favorite book of all time is Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass.
Oh, yeah.
It's the same kind of idea. So this idea of,
Isn't
like,
that just math, though? Isn't
there
that
is
just...
a lot of math in it. There's a lot of grammar. It's very educational
Okay.
and hallucinatory.
And that's the Woody.
Woody
Yes,
Derenberger.
with
Indrid Cold.
Indrid Cold. He took him to
Lanulos.
Lanulos.
Yes.
So it's
Very similar.
yeah.
Except
Well, and that's, yeah.
people were mostly naked. In fact, Woody was pretty underwhelmed at how normal everything was. Everything was just normal.
Yeah, but didn't you listen to him in that interview?
Mm-hmm.
He just seemed like one of those folk that it took a lot to get that guy excited.
Well, yeah, you're not wrong.
He came off as a really
He's-
laid back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So do you see parallels between this idea of the changeling child, like, willingly being abducted, air quotes, and some of these other stories?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of those things, like, sometimes the fairies, there are stories about new mothers being abducted to breastfeed the fairy
Yes,
children.
yeah. That's another big one.
Or, I've tried to talk about milk several times. I'm going to do it again.
Talk about milk. Tell us about milk,
So,
Tyler.
the fairies would come up and just take milk straight from the cow.
Yes.
And so you had to do a lot of gross things to make the cow's udders unappealing for fairies.
Yes.
In fact, I think even the Secret Commonwealth, it has instructions for, like, before the calf goes up to suckle, make sure and give it a handful of his mother's feces. Like, just smear crap all over that udder, and that'll keep the fairies away. Great. Yeah, like, don't do that. Don't do that.
That's utter madness, man.
Utter madness.
Dustin. That was great.
Sorry.
No, I love it. I love it.
I hadn't heard that part about the udders. I didn't know.
That's in the Secret Commonwealth by Robert Kirk. There's some instruction. He talks about, it's funny because I point out that he talks about most men being seers, but then he has stories about, like, 3 women and no men experiencing this stuff. So,
And that's what I see as most common. You were saying, like, now, but I'm, like, historically.
even historically, it's
yeah.
women. Yeah. And, I want to play social scientist in that. It's like, well, what do women have to lose? Men have a lot more to lose if during that time period, if they were coming out and saying they were seeing fairies, where what do women have to lose apart from their lives, apparently?
Right. And their children, and
This is true. That's risk is involved there as well. So,
and truly at that point, their ability to feed themselves,
yes. Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yep.
if we're saying a woman who is sewing clothes and selling eggs is a witch, what happens when that woman doesn't have a husband and is not allowed to sell eggs and make clothes?
Yeah. 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 Yeesh.
Yeesh, it's dark. It's dark stuff.
And that's interesting because wouldn't that be that story is in Ireland, right? Mm-hmm. And
You're talking
if
about Beverly. I almost said Beverly Cleary.
yeah, Beverly.
I haven't done that until you said it.
I'm so sorry.
So Bridget, you're talking about Bridget
Yeah,
Cleary's
with Bridget.
story? Yeah.
So we're talking about a changeling over here, but if that happened in Salem, in America, she's a witch.
Well, in fact, there is a Irish rhyme that goes, "Are you a witch? Are you a fairy? Or are you the wife of Michael Cleary, who is Bridget Cleary's husband?" So, and there are people that say that she was the last witch burned in Ireland.
Oh, okay. All right.
So it's the same thing, right?
Huh.
Literally the same thing, just talked about in a different way.
Yeah. Well, because in Ireland
It's
there
the
were
fairy thing.
options. It was either witch or fairy. And here it's just witch.
Yeah. So leaving out things like a saucer of milk for the fairies, like you say, it's a thank you. You can leave out all sorts of offerings for fairies.
Yes, and I want to hear you talk to me about this because I was around when you got a book for Christmas a year or two ago. Mm-hmm. How would you describe it?
The title of the book is Trojan Feast.
And I want to know everything.
And it is just about how often food comes up in these conversations. Mm-hmm. And actually, I was going to tell a story about once you, like these children who are coerced to go out to hang out with fairies, and sometimes it's young adults, but they go out into the woods, and then suddenly they come back days later, and they're like, oh my God, I had a wonderful time. It was this party. We ate so much food. It was so delicious. And then I woke up, and everything was gone, and they're like, well, let's get this person to throw up and see what they ate, and it's just like dirt and grass and stuff like that. It's fascinating. But leaving out an offering for a fairy, they will take the belief is that they will take the essence of that food. So in the morning you leave your milk and cookies out for Santa Claus. He came down and he took the essence of that stuff.
But the cookies are still there.
The cookies are still there. Yeah. You should not eat them. Anything that was left for the fairies belongs to the fairies. You just dispose of that. They got what they needed from it, which is interesting.
I'm not getting rid of a good cookie. I can tell you that much right now.
Even if the essence is gone, you pick up that Oreo, it just turns to dust in your mouth.
That's fine. Taking the chance.
Or leaves and twigs. And I mean, that's another thing that's like really common. Some people believe that, back to changelings, that they are not replaced with a fairy, but are actually replaced with like a log. And so and this is only for babies. But the child is like wood that looks like your child.
Yeah.
You know, which is another way to sort of absolve yourself of. But yeah, they turn a lot of things into like forest stuff. Money, that's another big one. Leaves. You get paid by a fairy and then there's leaves in your pocket. There are also stories, Tyler, that I've heard where you're not supposed to eat the food in fairy. If you eat
you're stuck.
You're stuck there, yeah.
And that is something I have heard as well. But there have been, it's more common with, I'm not going to say modern, but I'm going to say modern era within the last 100 years of people who are like, I went on a UFO and they gave me this thick oil to drink.
It's weird that food, now that we're on this food thing, because now my brain's like sitting here turning, because you got Hansel and Gretel. In that story, it's food, right? There's our candy and sweets. Coraline. Yeah. Okay, I just watched Coraline. I just listened to the audiobook, so I'm on a Coraline kick right now. But when she goes to the other mother always has this elaborate like meal.
Yeah.
And it's talking about how good the food is and all that.
Well, and then Lion the Witch in the Wardrobe, when you first encounter the what is she, Winter Queen?
Snow Queen?
But anyway, she offers Turkish delight.
Yeah.
Something unique.
Which tastes gross, by the way.
It's like, yeah, it is.
It's not
gross.
even sweet.
It's just
gummy,
gooey mess.
Yeah.
It's just all the Alice in Wonderland. You go there and there's all the treats and it's just like,
and it affects
going through my head right now.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we know it's there. We've read these stories. It's just interesting that food and treats
it has a new connection
like
for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's, I'm realizing now that you brought that up, like, it's often sweets.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's just because it's often children, but I think even with stories that are about grown-ups, it's often like dessert type things, cookies, sweets. What is that?
The UFO experience when someone is abducted, it's especially true if they are going to be intimate with another being on the ship. They have to be cleansed first. So not only is it they have to drink this oily liquid that they say doesn't have any taste, or it has a feel that's heavier than water, whatever that means. Anyway, not only do they drink this thick liquid, but it's also like sponged onto them. It is some sort of cleansing.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that.
The author of A Trojan Feast is Joshua Cutchin. His books are so interesting to me because he is looking at all of the stories collected and talking about what is similar in all of them. And so this is the thing. He even talks about Sasquatch. Bigfoot is offering things to eat to people when people have their encounters. And those are wild stories because it's like a family of Sasquatch that this person has ended up with, and they can't leave. They're just kind of kept there, but they're well taken care of. They're given this food, but they can't leave, except eventually they do. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the story. Or it never happened.
Well, I'm thinking about things I've read, and I don't know how much of this is true because I read a ton of like historical fiction, which it's fiction, but it has true things in it. This whole idea of like if you feed your guests, then no violence can be committed in that home or whatever.
That's a big thing in Game of Thrones.
It is.
And
it is.
you walk in, it's like, somebody get me some bread right now.
Yeah. But that comes from, that comes from actual, like, Game of Thrones is not historical, y'all.
Of course not.
But it comes from actual historical things, right? Because it appears in all kinds of fiction. And so I wonder if that has some connection with the, like, feeding people when they come into your new land. It's like a contract. Like, if you eat that food, you now have a contract of some kind with that person.
Yeah. And that's...
I'm speculating entirely.
Sure, yeah. Well, that's all we do, so...
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's all speculation.
So you were talking about fairies and milk. The flip side of that is salt. I don't know if you knew that.
Okay, I've heard something about salt. Yeah.
Yeah, and so there's a fairy story. It's one of those ones where you go off with the fairies. And this was nursing mothers get kidnapped often. This was a nursing mother story. These stories get repeated over and over.
Of course.
There's many, many permutations of it. But in this one, the woman goes to fairy and they offer her a feast. And they reassure her that everything that she's eating has been sprinkled with salt. And that is to let her know it's human food and safe to eat because the fairies cannot eat salt. So, and that's really interesting.
So in modern paranormal things, where do you see salt? What does salt help you with?
Isn't that interesting?
You can cleanse your house with salt.
Well, yes.
Sprinkle salt at the doorway.
But I think that's a fairy thing.
Yes, but they use it for cleansing the house of spirits as well.
Oh, okay.
For demonic.
Yep.
Salt is used, salt rings.
Yep.
You can't break the barrier of salt.
Right,
in some,
yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's yeah. So it's like...
So it's so
just
funny.
a mesh of like...
I talk about this all the time. I'm like, it's all fairies.
It's all fairies.
That's my lens,
That,
right?
yes, yeah.
And like your lens might be, it's all aliens.
It's all aliens.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that's so interesting.
Yeah.
To be clear, I don't think there are aliens.
No.
It is something
I said
like...
might be.
Sure. Yeah.
Intentionally, because I don't want to speak.
Dustin and
I
I
see them all the time.
Dustin and I have this conversation often. Like, if I experience something supernatural, it's likely going to be alien. If Dustin experienced something supernatural, it's going to be a ghost.
Yeah.
I hope if I experience it, it's fairies.
It's a fairy. Of
That's
course.
all I want.
Do you, when you were younger, do you remember, did you have a love for fairy, for the stories of fairy?
That is the section of the library I went to over and over and over again. And not just fairy, right? Like I was constantly trying to read books from other cultures that have fairy elements. So like Jinn, for example.
Yeah.
Or the Russian folktales are fascinating. Like their fairies are so dark. It's great. So like, yeah, I always wanted to know all about that.
So what's interesting about that is, so that's embedded. You've embedded that. I've embedded ghosts because when I was younger, that was what I was latched onto and have always been latched onto. Tyler's always read the alien side of things. I mean, well,
as a child, it was monsters. I was terrified of monsters.
Yeah.
I didn't know what was after me, but something was.
Yeah.
And aliens are for whatever reason in the early '90s. That's what I latched onto. Those were the monsters that were after me.
I think of you more now as cryptids than aliens.
Yeah.
But they're all fairies. So.
But they're all of course they're all fairies.
All fairies.
Sasquatch is just a spirit of the forest.
Yep.
Potentially.
Well, and fairies, fairies used to be gods. And then they got demoted because, primarily because of Christianity.
Right, yeah. And that is what I was alluding to earlier with some religions saying if it's not this specific thing, then it's this other thing.
Well, and that changelings used to be demons, in fact.
Right.
When the idea of changelings first began, the first time you see writing about it, I shouldn't say that's when the idea began. Of course, it's not when it began. But the first time you see writing about it, it's, I don't remember the guy's name, but it's a monk. But yeah, warning about demons replacing your children with a child that looks just like your child, but it's a demon.
You talk about, well, when you think about pre-Christian areas and things like that, a lot of this is not true necessarily in America, though places like this exist. But like shrines, you would have wandering your footpath, and you come across a shrine to some forest spirit. And then Catholicism comes through, and all those convert to, these are shrines to the Virgin Mary, which arguably is just co-opting fairy.
Well, she's a fairy too.
Yes, that would be my argument. John Keel talks about BHM and BVM sightings. BHM is Big Hairy Monster, and Blessed Virgin Mary is the BVM, of course. So, And I'm not saying that to diminish anyone's beliefs or anything like that, but this is all very similar, these experiences. And if your children are raised very Catholic, their paranormal experience is going to likely be the female figure is the Virgin Mary. But 1,000 years before that would have been a fairy.
Right.
So, interesting.
Very, very.
More along the food thing, and this is, in my mind, this is one of the clearest things, and I wish there was more that I could find. I was actually going to text you about this and be like, use your research skills because the internet's broken for me.
Why didn't you do that? It's my favorite thing.
Okay, we'll do a follow-up.
Things Sarah looked up.
Things Sarah looked up to correct us from last time.
Yeah.
Okay, so there is a story about this cow that belonged to the fairy people, and it ate some buckwheat that belonged to a woman. And the woman marches over to the fairies and is like, I need compensation for the buckwheat that your cow just ate. And the fairy's like, all right, calm down. Here's this thing of buckwheat. Hands her this pot of seeds and is like, this is for you and your family. If you ever share this with anybody, it will go away. And so she is able to feed her family because she's got a never-ending supply of buckwheat that just comes out of this container that she's making all these buckwheat cakes and all that stuff. Well, a woman comes by needing food, and absent-mindedly, the woman gives her some of this buckwheat cake. And then when it emptied, it did not refill. So, modern story with buckwheat, and this is one of my
This is interesting.
favorite UFO
I was wondering if you were going to
stories.
throw this in there,
Joe Simonton. This is April 18th, 1961. Eagle River, Wisconsin. Joe Simonton's been out. He comes back in for a bite of lunch. And as he's standing in his kitchen, he thinks the roof comes off his house. Something lands in his front yard. He thinks the roof has come off. So he goes out in his front yard, and there is a UFO. There is a ship there. And a door opens up. And you can listen to this interview as well. It's fascinating. But he's like, this door opens up, and there's this little man in there, and he makes this gesture like he wants some water. And so I'm like, okay. So I go down to my basement, and I get a vessel for water. I fill it up with water. I bring it back, hand it to him, and he salutes me with his palm out, back of his hand, and I salute him. What do you do?
It's an interesting interview.
Takes the water. And then as he's standing right there at the doorway of this thing, he looks over, and there's another guy over there just grilling away at something. And he's just trying to make conversation with these people who aren't really talking to him, these small people that are in the ship. And he makes this point at the griddle. And they're like, oh, well, you want something. So they give him 3 or 4 of these pancakes that he's grilling up over there. Thanks, whatever. Door shuts, lifts off the ground without making a sound, tilts, and then shoots off. And in the interview, he has a piece of the pancake that he shows, but it turns out to be a buckwheat pancake. And it's funny because he says that's all they were eating. No wonder those guys are so small. But it's one of those things where it's like, here is this thing that shows up. These little people inside need something, and they offer. It's just this food exchange, you know.
And why is it buckwheat?
Why is it buckwheat?
I was looking to see if buckwheat had a different name. That maybe it was called
hiccup.
something else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Had you
interesting.
ever heard that story before of Joe
No.
Simonton?
No.
You should watch his interview. It's just very practical the way he talks about it. Like, he's just a farmer in a rural area.
His demeanor reminds me of Woodrow
Derenberger.
Same.
Yeah. Just like, this totally happened and it was real weird.
I love the directness of that. That doesn't speak to skepticism, nor does it speak to belief. It's like,
This is what I saw.
yeah. And I would find it very hard to speak about it and not lean one way or the other.
Right.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
It is hard to do. Those parallels are so interesting. Are you drinking a different tea?
I am drinking a different tea.
Do you want to tell us about this different tea you're drinking?
Sure. Same company, Snowy Owl. I'm obsessed with them. They have a tea. It's getting later in the day, so I switched to something with less caffeine.
Okay.
So this is called Dreamgate. Capture a moment of tranquility. It says the low caffeine and high antioxidant benefits of white tea with rose hips for an extra boost of vitamin C, joined by stress-relieving lavender blossoms and gentle citrus. And I told you before that they have instructions on exactly how to brew it. So this one, it's funny because it's like just off boiled water. So I made it entirely wrong because we poured it straight from the pot. And the
should have
pot
rested.
should have been, yeah, we should have rested it for a minute. So anyway, it's very good. Really citrusy.
When you open that, I immediately smelled the lavender,
Yeah.
but nothing else.
I think you might have seen me, like, I opened it and, like, had to stick my nose in the bag because it, like, smelled, like this smell came off of it that was really nice.
One of my favorite drinks is London Fogs.
Oh, yeah,
And
I love
so
it.
the lavender and the vanilla just, yeah.
I just mix Earl Grey tea and then pour vanilla almond milk in it.
Oh, okay. I mean, there's tons of ways to make London
great.
Fogs, yeah.
I should have talked about this honey, too.
Well, let's talk about the honey.
weird.
Since I'm plugging things, the honey that
Are you
I'm
getting paid
using-
for this?
Well, here's the thing. I'm going to keep talking about stuff I love on your podcast until people start sending me free stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the honey that I'm using is high desert honey, which we got in Santa Fe, and it's like a small local apiary that does blends. And so the one that I'm using right now is lavender. But they have, ones that have like different like healing herbs and stuff in it, like turmeric. So I really like them.
That's pretty cool.
And the honey's heckin' good. It's really good.
It's hard to go wrong with honey unless you're under 3.
It's all this like really, see how like opaque and thick that is?
I was
Yeah.
seeing the color of it, yeah. It
Yeah.
was,
I'm sure
It's
that
raw honey. It's not like
Yeah, it's-
processed. So
yeah.
I
natural
guess that's
honey
what
is-
it looks like
is really
before.
good, yeah.
I have a buddy who's an entomologist. He works mostly with bees. They have beehives as well, and he brought me some raw honey from his bees, and he was like, this is raw, it's unfiltered. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's okay, man. He's like,
Yeah.
you may find bug parts in it. I'm like, it's okay, man.
Yeah,
I know
yeah.
what honey is.
Yeah.
It's okay.
I've never seen bug parts in this honey, but it does leave like a little bit of like some kind of grit that floats on top of my tea, which I think would bother some people. But I'm like, no, it's like probably pollen or something. Who knows?
How's the episode going so far?
I'm
scratching the
mainly
surface.
focused on changelings because I thought the doppelganger episode was so interesting.
I like
know
that
what I mean?
stuff, yeah.
But there's so many things
Yeah.
to talk about.
An interesting topic of conversation might be to talk about the written word, the
Yeah.
care of books. If you had important books, you had to take them out every now and then and clean them off and put them in the sun to kill all the mold. And
I'll always talk about books. I teach a whole section of my class on fairy tales and folk tales and what the difference is between them. Why in America we have legends versus fairy tales that come from other countries.
Well, tell us why.
Well, because our history isn't quite as long.
Yeah, because we are young comparatively.
Basically, yeah. So there are fanciful elements to our tall tales. I guess I shouldn't say legends, tall tales. But they don't have the benefit of time making them more and more and more fanciful.
Yeah.
Right? So we don't have a lot of magic in our folklore.
So in my outline here,
Yeah.
I've got this thing about talking about animism as like
Oh, yeah.
the original, maybe it's the foundation of fairy belief, because there are, it's hard to talk about early culture because especially in the Western world we talk about primitive culture. And it's like that's kind of a put down, and that's not an accurate way to view other people. But other cultures viewed there was a spirit in everything. There's a spirit in the tree. It may be a specific spirit in that tree, but there is also a general forest spirit. And the same with rocks, the same with any living thing or unliving thing. It's just in case you want to be nice to that thing. And and that in my mind, reading those stories, it makes sense to me that the next logical step is to personify that.
Yeah.
And like you can, if something has life that you can interact with, try talking to it. And it's one of those things, like I talk to trees sometimes. If I hurt a plant or something, I'm like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do that. And I don't know if the plant cares or not, but it's not going to hurt anything, right? So,
Hey, I have heard from people that obsess over plants, that talk to their plants, and they swear that if you talk to your plants, they do a lot better.
That's because they like the carbon dioxide you're spitting out when you talk to them.
yeah.
Seriously?
Told you, I'm a skeptic. I truly am.
Sure.
It's really hard for me to get on board with a lot of this stuff, but I want to. I feel like my life would be better in some way if I could really lean into some of these beliefs.
I talk about demonic reality all the time. And I know you've read that book. That book gave me permission to reconsider all that stuff. And so now that I'm moving, and where I'm moving to, there is open space. And I wander around and look at all the trees and touch the trees. And the other day, I was at one of the trees, and tucked in between the bark was part of a acorn, like just a little bowl. It had been broken off. There wasn't anything in it, but it was just like the bowl of the bottom of an acorn. And I was like, I'm going to clean this up. And I pulled it out, and I thought, no, a little fairy probably put that there on purpose. That's their drinking vessel. I'm going to put that back.
Oh, I love that.
And so I left that little acorn in there. And then this morning, before I come here to do this podcast, Susan's like, have you ever heard of the such and such woodpecker?
I was about to say that is a woodpecker's freaking acorn, bro.
And that was completely unprompted by Susan.
I love birds.
So anyway, yeah,
That's funny how that worked, yeah.
But just like you leave the food out that then you shouldn't eat afterward, what's it hurting? It's not hurting anything to not think, I don't know.
No. I think that's the appeal it had for me as a child, was just, it's like, I really do feel that some element of magic exists in the world. It could be just what is that quote about advanced technology? It looks like magic. I just really have this desire to have that belief because I think it makes the world more interesting.
You also feel more connected that way, in my opinion.
No, I get that.
You may not be doing anything, but you may be doing a lot. That's not like you can recycle and you can do all these other things to be kind to the environment, but also just hanging out in it. We talk about liminal spaces. If you have two trees close together, is that a doorway? Could that be? Did you cross over into fairyland through that? Just in case, don't go through
doors.
those.
Doors. I have a whole thing about doors.
Yeah, just in case, don't go through those two trees right there. You can go around it, but don't go through it.
It's a more interesting world when you have some sort of belief in those kinds of things. Because, like, truly, I want the story where, it's part of a fairy fort or whatever.
Yep. This was, maybe that's the doorway that the little critters get out.
Right,
And, who knows? And then that goes through the whole thing. If your belief isn't so strict due to a religious belief, the possibilities open up for that type of thing. And there's a book that Patrick Harper wrote after Daimonic Reality, and it's called The Philosopher's Divine Fire. He's talking about specifically in alchemy. And it was like, it's not a literal fire that we're talking about. It is active imagination. It is a way to think about the world. And that really sticks out to me as well.
I'm guessing that the animism stuff for you came from, what was the name of that book?
The fellow who coined animism, I'm going to have to look that up. Because there was an anthropologist that wrote 2 books that kind of introduced the concept of animism.
I am not familiar with animism in, like, Celtic, Irish, English fairy stuff, but a lot of course, the other things that I talk about that I think count as fairy from other cultures do have animism. And so I was curious if you knew something, if he talks about it in some way I just hadn't heard before.
Edward Burnett Tylor.
Oh, okay.
He wrote a book called Primitive Culture, and it's in 2 volumes, but he talks a lot about animism, the relationship between primitive societies and civilized societies. And of course, this book, that book came out in 1871.
Right.
So it's one of those things where likely if he were around today, he would disagree with Primitive Culture as the title for that book, because that's not how he approached it. He didn't come in and say, these people are backwards, let me exploit it. It was, here are these people's beliefs.
Right.
And so, as far as I know, he was, Edward Burnett Tylor is who coined the animism phrase.
Interesting.
And those books are public domain. You can snag those. But I was heavily influenced by a lot of the movies, the cartoons especially, that we grew up with as kids, has a lot of forest spirits and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean,
Like
think of something like Ferngully.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
For sure.
Ferngully has a fairy in it. Yeah, one of the things that I think is sort of interesting is so the fairy in Ferngully looks so different from what fairies... You talked earlier about they look just like regular people, right? And that was the case for a long, long time.
Right.
And I don't know if this is true. I probably should do some more research on it. But do you guys know about the Cottingley fairies?
The pictures, right?
Yeah, the photographs.
Sherlock Holmes, the author.
Yes.
Arthur.
Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Big defender of the Coddington fairies.
Yeah.
That's the one with the girl and
The
dancing,
2 girls got
fairy,
pictures of fairies. Yeah.
In the little bit of research I did into this, I feel like that is when it changed to fairies being these like little Tinkerbell, Ferngully looking people.
So if we want to talk about the effects of technology on beliefs,
Oh, interesting.
that was a camera, and those were images that were widely distributed.
Oh yeah. If you look at like old paintings, old art of fairies, they're typically like human-sized. They do have wings frequently. Art from the early 1800s and previous. You see them with wings. Not always, but they just like look like people. Maybe more ethereal.
Maybe their features are sharper. They have long fingers.
Oh. Let me see. I haven't looked at any fingers.
So when you think about spirit photography and ectoplasma,
Ectoplasm.
And then you have these pictures that come out around the same time.
Yeah.
1911, I think,
So
was the
it doesn't really help
fairies.
the case. Some spirit photography, a lot of it looks like paper mache and magazine or newspaper clipping cutouts to make look like a human on cheesecloth, stuff like that. And so in some cases we know that is what happened.
And there are people who are like, this is how I did this.
And so
Well,
putting
for the
that
record,
into...
the Cottingley fairies, the Cottingley girls in the 1980s said that they faked it. So,
So
Made the
where were
assumption
they
that you
getting
knew
the
that.
image?
Where'd they get the
You know
image?
what I mean? Like, so that's why I'm like...
right, where did the idea
Where
come
did that
from
idea come from? From what I found out, just trying to read into this for this episode, is like...
It's huge.
Like, yeah.
It's just
and
like our
so
world.
there's so many subcategories. There's
yeah.
so many different countries that have different depictions or whatever of the
They
what it
behave
would look
differently
like.
depending on the culture.
But where all of a sudden in America are we coming up with Tinkerbell? Like, where's that,
Where'd that come from?
coming from? When they talked about faking it and they talked about how they did it, do we know where there's...
So the fairies were cutouts, paper cutouts that they
Okay.
put on little sticks. Like you, there's so much stuff to look at for all of this. I did not have time to do a deep dive on the Cottingley fairies' influence on what fairies look like today. But my theory is, because you just don't see a whole lot of the petite fairies in imagery prior to them. In order to fake fairies, these little girls couldn't fake something that was a human size in their photograph.
Right.
They had to do something small so they could put a paper thing on a little stick to put in their picture. But then after that, we see a lot more Tinkerbell, petite
Yeah.
fairies, right? That look similar to what they created. This is all my theory. At some point, maybe we'll do another thing about spirit photography, and I'll come with receipts on exactly
there
how
we
all
go,
that
yeah.
went down. But
Well, that's an interesting thing, too, because I'm thinking back to when we did that play, The Insanity of Mary Gerard. And there are things we wanted to do, and there are things that we just could not pull off.
Right.
And so it's like,
Oh, crap.
you make those choices during production of, this is what I want, but I'm not going to be able to get that because I don't have something to come down from the ceiling and, whatever else. So that makes sense that it's like, we got to have them in the picture with us, so they got to be small.
because that's what we can do.
That's what we can do.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
So I'm going to do things we got wrong in this episode real quick.
Oh,
Or do you want to save it?
no, do it.
So I was saying that I thought that the Cottingley fairies were sort of the first, and they may be the first visual representation of petite fairies. But in fact, Dustin, you were correct that Peter Pan, which came out before the Cottingley fairies, the book describes Tinkerbell as being, let me read this little quote. The extremes in her personality are explained in the story by the fact that a fairy's size prevents her from holding more than one feeling at a time. So when she is angry, she has no counterbalancing compassion. So she's not described in detail in the book, but that sentence implies that she is small.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it wasn't the Cottingley fairies. It may be that the Cottingley girls made small fairies because of reading
the
Peter
book?
Pan,
Yeah.
because it came out before.
How did you learn about the fairies? How did you learn about the Cottingley fairies, if you can recall?
I can't. I bet you anything it was
Through-
a PBS program.
I mean, the first time I ran across them was just from spirit photography.
So
Like, just being, like, already into that. Doing, like, looking up spirit photography and stuff. If you go on Google and stuff and start looking up spirit photography, those pictures are going to show up
Yeah.
at some point.
So Arthur Conan Doyle was a big believer in spiritualism. And one of the things that people like to use to discredit his ideas is that he was scammed by the
Yeah.
Coddington fairies.
Well, not only them.
Well, sure.
I feel like he was very gullible. And so it kind of now, It's just more of a... When his name's attached to something that you really believe in, you kind of cringe. Because you're like, you're not helping the case, man. Like, go over here. Mm-hmm. So you're like, believe in spiritualism, but then one of the biggest spiritualists at the time of the movement is...
Someone who's been deceived over.
A lot of times, but he was one of the biggest advocates of the movement. And then it's like, so you can see how...
And like Walter Crooks, who kept having this apparition that he would talk about, and people were like, well, he can't see very well and clearly can't tell the living from the dead. It's like, dang it. So anyway, modern fairy stuff, just to kind of round this out here, I was looking through a book called The Good People, New Fairy Lore Essays. It's edited by...
I want to read that, too.
Peter Narvaez.
Don't look at me.
Yeah. There are a bunch of essays, and I read one on the Tooth Fairy, and it's actually by Rosemary Wells of the Bunny Rabbit kid story. But she has this essay on the Tooth Fairy and the Tooth Fairy's place in modern society. Mm-hmm. And this, I think her essay was written in the late 80s, but she is looking back. Traditionally, the tooth had special meaning, and when you lose your first one, that's that transition phase. You are becoming an adult. Mm-hmm. Not really, but by our standards anyway. Mm-hmm. So, that first tooth, that's a big deal, and there's some sort of ceremony where you have to throw it a certain direction, or you have to do something a certain direction, or something like that. And then how that tradition carries down, and how in her essay she's fascinated by the parents who do that for every tooth, because it used to be just that first one. Mm-hmm. Tooth Fairy came for every one of my teeth that I lost. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But she has interviews with these parents who are like, the Tooth Fairy is real, and she's going to come for your tooth. And the kids are like, I know that she's not. I know you're swapping it out. But it's the parents wanting that belief. So that was her approach to that. Like, what is the reason why we would want to hang on to something like that?
But to me, that seems perfect, because it's this cusp of adulthood, or maybe like, even now, I think we would say losing your teeth is really one of that, like, first step where you look at your kid and you're like, oh my gosh, they're going to be an adult one day. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. And so there is this desire to hold on to innocence for that child. Yep. Right? Mm-hmm. And so please believe in magic. Please, I want you to believe in magic, because I don't want to believe that you're growing up. Yeah. Yeah. It makes sense. I think that's a lot of what Santa Claus is, too.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, I would argue that Santa Claus is a fairy at this point.
Oh, yeah. And that would be my argument. I did it kind of by accident when I said you leave your milk and cookies out for Santa Claus. Don't drink that in the morning. You need to dump that down the sink,
Well, it's been sitting out all night.
I mean, I had never heard that you're not supposed to eat it. That's
really
new. Yeah, well, for me.
All of its essence is gone. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I like it. I just had never heard it before.
I think I got that from the Trojan Feast book. I think that's where I got that concept. We've about reached the end here of our time. Arbitrarily, time is a construct and has no meaning, but it's getting cold.
It's getting dark. Well,
because now you brought up the Tooth Fairy, and the Tooth Fairy's always been a creepy one for me, but
I like.
So there has to be something there.
we talk about media a lot in these podcasts, and one of my favorite depictions of many tooth fairies is in the second Hellboy movie.
Oh yes.
And there are these little critters like, oh, those are kind of cute, but then you see them and it's like they are here to gnaw your bones.
I love them. No, that's the thing. That's what I think another one about scary fairies would be great. Yeah. Like, I'm really into, like, dark fairies, unseelie, which we can get into later, but that would be really fun to do the creepy stuff. But I don't want your beautiful podcast to turn into a fairy podcast.
Well, we're going to keep
fairy,
it
right?
It's all fairy.
It's all fairy. I like some of the other stuff too. I just am sort of a chicken, and sometimes you guys talk about stuff that's too scary for
I was
me.
going to say, have we talked about anything that... Well, I mean, doppelgangers. Those things are freaky.
That doesn't scare me at all.
I know, like, even in that episode, Tyler, like, I think twice in that episode, Tyler was like, I'm just... he was laughing the whole time because he's just like, man, this is not on my fear factor at all.
Doppelgangers is not on my radar.
I know, but I get it, though. I do get it. Like, the eeriness of that.
And you explaining it makes sense. How you explain it, you know.
Yeah, and I think initially when Tyler told me you were going to do a podcast about doppelgangers, I was like, well, I have a doppelganger. I have never seen this person. But the thing that's creepy is seeing them, right? And that's the whole fetch thing. It's only if you see yourself.
Yeah.
It's not that somebody else is telling you, like, I saw someone who looks exactly like you. That's not scary. But, like, if you encounter that person,
Yeah.
I get that that's scary.
Yeah.
Sure.
That would freak me out.
And it's interesting because in the doppelganger stories that we did cover in that episode, it is like fetch.
Mm-hmm.
Because they are bad omens, and when
Yeah.
that person saw themselves, usually
They
death
died.
followed. So it's interesting.
Yep.
So, dang, it's all this stuff just intertwines. It's so cool.
We talked a lot about food, and we hinted at Men in Black stuff. But with a lot of the Men in Blacks, when they show up, if they're invited in, they don't know how to smoke cigarettes. They don't know how to eat Jell-O. They're wearing all black, and it looks like brand new stuff, but it's just weird, you know, not quite right.
It's so new to me as like, most of the stuff that you guys talk about, I've at least heard of. But weirdly, like, my only knowledge of Men in Black is the Will Smith movie, and that.
Well, I think most people.
Sure, yeah.
I think
That
you're
was the
not
pop
only
culture
one.
thing.
Yeah.
What'd you find out about long fingers?
Oh, we kept talking about stuff, and
We did, yeah. Look at those long fingers. Pointy features.
in a black outfit.
Fairies are Men in
Telling you.
Black. Men in
That's a
Black are fairies.
hobgoblin from the Tudor era. There's some long fingers, and of course the pointy ears. That's been fairly consistent.
Pointy noses and chins, maybe?
Yeah, there's a picture here too of Greek nymphs. This says, I don't know if this is true. Nymphs, satyrs, and sirens thought to be the ancestors of British fairies. And these nymphs have very, very pointy noses. Like, their whole face is very elongated and long feet. There are no hands in this particular image, but feet are very, very long. So, I don't know. Maybe. One day we'll do another show and I'll do better research. I'll actually come prepared.
This has been great. I just think this is all wonderful.
I've had the most fun.
Great.
And you guys have made me feel so comfortable with not knowing things.
We don't know anything.
We don't know anything. Yeah.
We don't
I
claim-
think it went well.
Yeah. Sure.
But I'm an educator, and so I feel a sense of obligation.
Well, I hope we don't ruin your reputation.
No one's going to know about this, right? Is this podcast going to be... It's just for us.
Oh,
this
that's
is
it.
just us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No one's going to hear it.
Should have signed the release before.
Yeah.
Oh, I signed no release. I mean, you're just going to have to throw that out. I'm going to tell everyone I know.
Awesome.
Do it. Yeah.
That'd be great.
Oh, do you have a Patreon?
We do have a Patreon.
Why don't you ever talk about it?
Dustin does talk about it. He talks about Instagram nonstop.
Yeah.
Instagram is not Patreon.
It's the same thing.
No, it's not.
But speaking of all that, we are on Spotify
We are.
and
Apple
Apple
Podcasts.
Podcasts. And we always say and others. Mm-hmm. And
What are
I
the
was
others?
like, man, I wonder what the other like actual list is. And man, one day I came across just like kind of playing on the internet and looking us up, and we are on a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And there's no way that. Well, I mean, if I had the list in front of me, I'd just read them all off right now. But it's a big list. Mm-hmm. But I always say those two because those are the two mainstream listening platforms.
We're on YouTube as well.
And it's just audio.
Yeah, we're not a video.
Don't jump
medium.
into the... Yeah. And then follow us on Insta. Yeah.
That's Instagram, if y'all aren't on the
for,
lingo.
And leave a nice review on your podcast apps.
That'd be nice. Yeah.
That would be awesome, yeah.
Do that.
Yeah.
Like and
Feedback.
subscribe.
We
Tell
love
all your
feedback.
friends.
Like if somebody's interested in something that we haven't covered yet, and put it on our radar. So yes, we try to post pictures on Instagram to go along with each episode.
All right. Well, like I said about cross-eyed cricket, I didn't like it the first time I smoked it.
Yeah.
But I smoked 3 bowls tonight. It was great.
Yeah, isn't that weird? How
Weird.
that happens? It is. It's weird. Your tea good?
Both of my teas were really good.
Yeah.
They were really good, and I love that honey. So I made good choices.
Excellent.
Good deal.
I'm happy with my choices.
Yeah.
And you smoked both of those blackbirds, didn't you?
Yep. The grackle and the cactus wren.
Yeah, buddy.
Yep.
Did you smoke through all those flamingos?
I have 2 or 3 left at home, but that's not the first order.
Yeah.
You remember?
Yes,
This is like a 3rd order of those or something like that. Man, they are so good. And like, do yourself a favor if you want to try what me and Tyler are talking about. Go over to Smoking Pipes, and because that's one of the limited.
They're exclusives.
Yeah, they are Lanceros, and they're a quick smoke.
Quick smoke if you just have a little bit of time.
They're not super complex, but the one note that it has in there, like, hits like the whole time.
Yep.
It's
Consistent.
a consistent note. It's good. And it's called the Flamingo. And it's a Lancero. So it's like this long, it's like 7 inches, it's like little bitty, and it's just funny. Like, the names are great.
Yep.
The marketing is great. It gets me every time.
I love that. Like the images that sometimes I buy things just because I like the art on it, and that artist doesn't have just the art. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah.
I was looking at a board game the other night, and it was like, God, I love the art on this board game, but I will never play it.
I'm
It's
a
not the
sucker,
kind of
yeah.
game that I like.
I'm like you. I'm a
Yeah.
sucker for art, and so anytime something like, you're never gonna, but collectors are like that, and I'm a sucker for that too. Like, if I see something, I want to get it just because of how it looks.
Yeah.
You know.
I have
Is
decks.
Is this a cigar hat that
No.
you're wearing now? I
No.
really like your hat.
Oh, I'm so glad she brought my hat up.
I really like it.
Listen, folks, this is my dad hat. This year we went to Albuquerque, New
I
Mexico
love New
for a
Mexico.
hockey tournament. Yes, hockey in Albuquerque. We went to the Snake Museum, and you go through the gift shop first, and then to the where they had all the snakes, and then you're coming out, and there was this rack of hats, and they were all the same this green hat, except for they had different animals on them, and I was looking through them, and there was some cool ones, like bats. I love bats,
love
you know,
bats.
and this one just like popped out, and I was like, I love ravens and crows.
Me too. I'm bats and
And
corvids all the way.
So I saw that, and I was like, and it's so like, it's this ugly green, but it is this beautiful
No, it's
raven on it,
gorgeous.
and I was like, I gotta have that hat. So I bought it, and we get out in the car, and I slap this thing on and look in the mirror, and I'm like, man, it is the most comfortable hat I've ever worn. And so, like, I wear this all the time, and I'm like, yeah, this is my dad hat, straight
It's a
up dad
great
hat.
hat.
And, well,
Smoke's thinning out.
yep, we're coming out of it.
Time to come on back.
Thanks for letting me go through the smoke with you guys.
Yeah,
Sarah, thanks so much
And
for
the
joining
steam.
us. Yeah.
The steam.
It was fun.
Thanks to all you new listeners.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us.
Oh,
I want to, because they're listening because they heard I was going
Because
to
of
be
Sarah.
on.
Yeah.
oh yes, okay, yeah.
Sarah would
yeah.
like to thank all the new
Yeah.
listeners, and we would like to
Yeah.
thank Sarah for bringing us the new listeners.
Yeah. Climb on board.
Yep. All right. Play us off.
Play us off.
They whisper soft where the mushrooms grow. Fires burn when fear decides. The